Okay, welcome back everyone to a Black Ice Hearts of Iron 3 version 12, Black Ice that is, tutorial series. Again, the mod was last updated in April 2024, and so this tutorial will be very up to date with regards to the version you are playing, assuming that you're not playing in like 2030. So we're going to cover a topic that is, I think, very understood and still, even from veteran players, can be complicated. And so I'll do my best to try and explain it. But that is the Navy and how to build it up and what the composition of your Navy should look like, and, you know, how your various fleets should be composed. It's obviously going to vary based on the country you play. But even as somebody who likes to play as Japan, I have at times struggled to figure out the right mix of fleets and size and things to build. So if you are in that camp, don't worry, you're not alone. So first we're going to go over the different ships, what their pros and their cons are. Then we're going to talk about fleet composition. We're going to talk about how fleets perform in battle, what that looks like. We're going to talk about convoys and raiding and how to protect them and how to attack them. And then finally, some miscellaneous things that just don't fit into the right categories and boxes. So first, what we'll talk about is the dark blues. And think of it this way. The dark blues, typically with the exception of, well, yeah, actually the dark blues, let me just say that period, require support in order to be effective. So they're great. They're great ships, but they're not great alone. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to complement them with the light blues. And let me get these guys out of the way because they're annoying me. Okay. So first and foremost, what are command ships? The command carrier, the command battleship. Just think of it this way. They are the like Yamamoto of the fleet. They are making the fleet just a little bit better than they would be otherwise. I can't tell you specifically what they provide because I haven't played version 12 yet. I can just say in older versions, they do enhance your fleet. They make your fleet just a little bit better. And so they are nice. It is nice to have at least one of them in at least your premier fleet, your main fleet. On paper, it doesn't look like they provide anything, but they do. They provide a little bit of additional bonus, I believe. At a minimum, they're nice flavor. They don't cost anything more than, you know, your normal battleship and your normal carrier. So it's nice to have one. So just know that. And then you can make them your flagship. So if you go here, one cool little feature for the game is if you have a, let's take him out. You have a particular ship that you really like the Akagi, for example, again, famous, you know, aircraft carrier. You can actually make that, well, actually it's a battleship. Never mind. You can make it the pride of your fleet, which I believe, if I recall, it getting sunk has negative modifiers on your popularity. But so long as you have the pride of your fleet and it's not sunk, I think it gives you some bonuses to the popularity of your party and your government. So I think it is good to have a couple of ships that are the pride of your fleet. So let's make the Nagato the pride of our fleet. The country can only have one battleship or battle cruiser designated the pride of the fleet. This ship gets plus 2% more experience. And then if it's sunk, we will incur 2 descent. And then we'll incur 1 descent from the designation. So, a read designation. So that's what it does. Okay, so it's a little bit different than what I'm used to, but there you go. That's what making the pride of the fleet does. It gives you that ship some bonus XP. So if you have a particular ship that you think is going to be involved in a lot of combat, then you probably want to make that the pride of your fleet and protect it at all costs. And then in turn, it'll get some bonus XP, making it even better as the game goes on. But alas, let's get back to the flotillas. So what I mean by the blues needing support. Now look at your battleships. Okay, it does 94 damage to other ships, but it has 0 submarine attack. It has 0 submarine detection, right? So that's the first major thing that battleships lack is submarine attack. Moreover, while it does do some damage to air, ultimately, if somebody has CAGs, carrier air groups, and they're launching them at your battleships, your battleships are probably going to be toast unless they have support with them to deal with that air attack. Now, the Japanese, their battleships are pretty awesome. They have 11 air attack already. As you can see, there aren't really any other ships that match that against air attack. That being said, right, we can tech up to get destroyers having better air attack. You can build anti-air cruisers and so forth. But even with that 11 air attack, let me show you what our CAGs can do. 62 sea attack, right? So it's not going to take much from those CAGs to destroy a battleship. And the battleship's probably not going to shoot down those CAGs. And so what you want to do with your battleships is provide it with submarine detection and some sort of air protection slash meat shield, right? So destroyers tend to be really good complements to battleships because they're cheap. You can build up their air attack and they're really good at detecting submarines. Now, this is only 2, but we can tech them up to be much better. And then we can also build a whole bunch of destroyers to complement our handful of battleships to absorb all of the damage that would otherwise be taken by the battleships, which goes into positioning, which I will talk to you in a little bit. But positioning for purposes of sea battles is very, very important. To be specific, here is your positioning. This gives you the percentages. And those don't really mean a whole lot, I know. Just know that, for example, their carriers are really good at positioning, which means further away. And then you want to couple them with other units that are also good at positioning further away, like cruisers, which I will reiterate later in this video. If you're not tracking what I'm suggesting in terms of coupling up your dark blues with your light blues, but light cruisers tend to be really good for coupling with your carriers because they're fast. And they're also, their positioning is kind of further away, which is what you want. Whereas your destroyers are closer, means they need to be closer to shoot their guns, right? Which helps them, which actually works out well with battleships, because that means the destroyers will be close. They'll put themselves between the enemy and your battleships, doing damage while also taking damage. Whereas your cruisers need to be further away, which is actually nice because your destroyer or your aircraft carriers are the furthest away. And that tends to work out well. Now, the battle cruiser, which I haven't spoken to yet, is a little bit different. Now, you can use them with your battleships or your heavy cruisers. So kind of think of heavy cruisers as like a lighter battleship, cheaper, lighter, not as effective. So kind of a B, whereas your battleships an A. Your battle cruisers are a little bit different. They're kind of a mix between your battleship and your cruisers. That's why they're called a battle cruiser. And how people typically use them is hunting down other people's submarines or convoy raiding fleets. That's kind of how the best that they're used. They can hold up on their own. They're fast, and so they're really good as being used as hunters. Whereas your battleships and your aircraft carriers are much better used to deal with other people's actual like main battle fleets. So hopefully that makes sense. So again, battle cruisers, good for small battles, hunting down smaller fleets, operating on their own with, a couple destroyers or maybe a light cruiser or whatever you want to do with that. As your battleships / heavy cruisers and your aircraft carriers, those guys are all good for using against your opponent's big fleets. Typically, people are not going to be mixing battleships and heavy cruisers with aircraft carriers. Although, obviously, you can mix and match your fleets however you want. Typically, what people will do is for their aircraft carriers, they'll just load it out with light cruisers. Maybe one battleship, maybe. But the thing is, your carrier fleet should not be engaging your opponent so close that your battleships can actually engage, right? So typically what people do is carrier with your light cruisers, and then battleship / heavy cruisers with destroyers. Now you can put some light cruisers in with those destroyers, that's fine, but just know that optimally you want your ships to be able to maximize their positioning. And so your battleships are really good at 45%, your heavy cruise 37%, destroyers really close, but that means your destroyers are absorbing all the damage while your battleships and your heavy cruisers are shooting over them to the enemy and not taking damage themselves. Okay, so subsurface fleet. You got your long range subs, normal subs, coastal subs. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm really just highlighting this to note that there are differences, right, in terms of their range. Coastal are going to be the cheapest because they can't travel out very far, but because of that, they're coastal. So maybe for like Germany, I think coastal subs make a lot of sense, particularly against England. Maybe as Italy in the Mediterranean. But as Japan, you're almost certainly going to be using them against the US and England. And so you probably want the long range subs or the normal subs. And then just notice that there's a little bit of difference in terms of stats based on the research that you put into them. I did fail to mention, so I'll speak to it very quickly, your torpedo boats and your motor torpedo boats. Just think of those guys as like really cheap to build. They're cannon fodder, but maybe they can do some damage really quick before they die. That's the advantage to them. But they're not going to really absorb a lot of damage because they don't really have a whole lot to absorb. They'll be dead pretty quick. So just think of them as like one and dones in terms of damage dealing. Your passenger ships, I spoke to this in a prior video. Just know that passenger ships are really just for transporting troops. They're not for amphibious assaults. Don't use them for amphibious assaults. Instead, use these assault ship flotillas, which will be in pink. That'll tell you, hey, this is actually for amphibious assaults. Use these guys. Okay. Otherwise, just use the passenger ships for transporting back and forth between friendly territories. Now, one advantage to having your subs embedded in with your surface fleet is the surface detection, or rather submarine detection. So for example, submarine detection is 0, but surface detection is pretty high for your subs. Notice for your surface fleet, which is kind of silly, it's like 0 or 1. And again, the Japanese have one of the best navies in 1936. So what's nice is you can be in the same water, water location as an enemy's fleet, and you might not detect them because these water areas are very large. Let me get off here, like right here, right? It's a large water location. So even though all of the ships are in the middle for purposes of mapping, you might not detect each other unless you have a sub embedded with your fleet, because they have 7 for surface detection. So that's the first thing to note. These seaplanes, you'd wonder what purpose do they have? Well, not a whole lot, but the one thing they do provide is speed. So even though their surface detection is only 2 compared to subs, which are 7, and bear in mind the Japanese submarine tech is not super high. I think it's pre-36 levels. Yeah, so we're not even at 34 for submarine tech. But what the seaplanes do provide is speed. So your subs are, so again for Japan, 14 and 12, whereas your seaplane is 18. So what you might use your seaplane for in terms of surface detection is, maybe with a battle cruiser and some destroyers to ensure that you have that max speed available to the fleet while you're looking for convoy raiders like other destroyers or ASWs, which we'll go over in a moment, that sort of thing. So just know seaplanes do have their place, just like every other unit in the game. They have their place, they have their use. Just use them appropriately. And subs are an excellent complement to battleships in particular, because battleships are pretty slow, and so subs aren't going to be slowing them down, because remember, the speed of your stack is going to be whoever's the slowest. That's what the speed of your stack is going to be. And then just pay attention to the practicals, because that's what's going to affect build time, and it tells you up here like which practicals relate to which, right? Capital ship, cruiser for heavy cruiser, and so forth. Okay. Now, what's interesting to note, and unless they just changed this under version 12, I have always been led to believe that CAs, heavy cruisers, are capital ships, which means they need support from other ships to be successful. Looking at the stats, I don't see how that's any different. I don't see why that would be any different. Just know the practical is now cruisers. So looking at the stats, it still says to me that these guys are light battleships for all intents and purposes. Just know that the practical is now different. It is now cruisers that this will benefit from in the builds. Okay. So now that we've gone over the individual ships, let's talk about technology and upgrades. Note, not everything. So unlike aircraft, right? So you can build, a P-51 prototype for your P-40s. Those P-40s will upgrade to P-51s. Okay, in this game. Not realistic. That's the truth. And I mean, to be fair, right? Like, you don't want the game to be so realistic that you have to go through the tedium of, getting rid of all of your planes and then rebuilding them all, right? Like, there's some things that should be arcade-like. Cool. When it comes to ships, though, there are some things you cannot upgrade unless you actually send the ship back to dock and have it sit in dock for half a year to tech up. And what I'm referring to is your upgrade tab. You might say, for example, upgrade the engine for your destroyer. Well, that engine will not upgrade unless you actually send that ship back to port to have it upgraded. So if we look here at aircraft carriers, which I'll speak to actually very briefly since I didn't really touch on it. What's the primary difference between a main aircraft carrier and a light aircraft carrier? It's the number of CAGs it can carry on its ship. So a normal aircraft carrier can carry 2, which if you scroll down and look at CAG size, it says 2. If you look at the light carrier, it's going to say 1. So that's the first difference. So see here, we have 2 CAGs resting on the Kaga. I go here, he only has 1, so that's a little deceptive. Well, actually, what's happening is we only have 2 CAGs in this entire fleet. So what we need to do is we need to bring this guy another aircraft to fill him out, probably. But anyways, so that's the main difference, is that normal aircraft carriers can carry 2, so CVs carry 2. LCVs can only carry, or CVLs rather, can only carry 1 CAG. Okay, so the black, notice the black's here. Okay, yeah. When we get down to here, there's some blue and there's some black. Well, what does that mean? First off, no means we don't have a naval headquarters on this ship, which goes back to my point with the flotillas of your command carrier. This would say yes if you built one of those. Okay. It also means that we don't have carrier group doctrine, carrier group training, etc., etc., etc. This is all tech stuff. So as you if you use technology to upgrade these things, it will turn to yes. However, what will not turn to yes is fleet carrier class, for example. It is in black. Carrier angled flight deck. Can't upgrade that. Off center elevator. No. These are all technologies that if you upgrade them, this carrier will not be upgradable in here. So a little bit more, I think, easier to demonstrate here. Oops. So I just went ahead and pulled out one ship of each to make it a little bit easier. The destroyer, you cannot, I don't know why small shipyards, like whatever, dude, I don't care about that. You can't upgrade its anti-air guns. You cannot make it higher. You cannot make this destroyer a Fletcher class destroyer. But what you can do is you can upgrade its light anti-air, its special treatment steel, etc., etc., etc. So just know that the blue means, yeah, you can upgrade those for that particular ship. The black is no. And then if you want that ship to be upgraded to a, for example, Fletcher class destroyer, then you would have to click it. And then there should be a, this right here. It would probably say something to the effect of Fletcher class destroyer, or if you know that the Fletcher class destroyer has now been researched, clicking this would send it to the production tab to be upgraded to the Fletcher class destroyer. It will not be automatically upgraded through your upgrade. So just know that's a nuance in the game that is not present in your Army units or your Air Force units. Coastal units can be pretty good to use if you don't have to send them very far away, because they tend to be cheaper to make. So think, Germany, Italy, and the Mediterranean, whatever. Just kind of keep that in mind. There is a thing called pocket battleships, which I'll speak to very briefly right here. The principal feature of the pocket battleship design was that it had guns of large enough caliber to a 280 millimeter to outgun almost any enemy cruiser, so think battle cruisers, while fast enough to catch it, while being fast enough to outrun almost any enemy powerful enough to sink it. So what does that mean? Basically, it's a mini battleship. Okay, so it's better than your battle cruiser, but not as good as your battleship. So think if your opponent has a lot of battle cruisers, this guy would be nice to have. And they tend to be cheaper to build, but they're still a battleship in the terms of they need support, from destroyers, for example. I don't think as Japan, I would probably use these guys, but as Germany, I can see them being pretty helpful because they're mobile. They can deal with the British surface fleet, not including its battleships. So just know that there's other versions of ships here that you can build out. So there's the pocket battleship. There's the super heavy battleship, which just think like battleship on steroids. This guy right here. Mammoth cousin of the battleship. So very sexy. Very susceptible to aircraft though, right? So that's the downside. So just think, I think the Yamamoto might have been a heavy battleship. It didn't really do a whole lot in the theater, and it was sunk by planes. So there's those. And then if you go to cruisers, you can build an anti-air cruiser, which obviously would work really well with your battleships or with your aircraft carriers. For your destroyers, let's go escorts. You can build ASW ships, which are basically sonar. So basically ships equipped with a bunch of sonar to find submarines. And so they're very good for dealing with convoy raiding and protecting your own convoys. That's this right here. And then we talked about it a little bit, but for amphibious assault, you go to transports, and then you can build up your landing craft flotillas or your assault ship flotillas. And then your aircraft carriers, normal carriers, light carriers. We talked about that already. You also have escort carriers, a little bit different. Smaller versions of your aircraft carriers. And they can provide a form of hunter killing for those guys. So that's another option, right? So just know that there's a couple other variants of ships you can build in this game other than what I've shown you, and they're available using the top right corner of your different ship build tabs. Okay, so fleets have two different speeds. They have travel and they have combat. What I mean by that is travel is just how quickly they move across the map in general. And then combat is how quickly can they get into position to do what they need to do to inflict casualty on the enemy. So let's take the heavy cruiser, for example. It's got a max speed of 30.65 kilometers per hour. Again, if you couple that with somebody who has like 20 kilometers, so that's 30.65, you couple him with your battle cruiser, that is the speed of your fleet right there. If that's the slowest dude, just know that, okay? So that's the speed moving across the map. But then you have your combat speed, which is sorry, I should have found this for you before I pulled it up. My apologies. Give me a second. Here we go. He gets a bonus to Mediterranean speed, by the way, too, which is interesting. I hadn't caught that before. All these different bonuses and negative modifiers for depending on where they're at on the map. It might just be your positioning speed. That might be dictating how fast they operate in combat. Yeah. So just know your max speed is going to be different than your actual in combat speed. And in combat, I believe, is your positioning right here. And that's going to dictate how well and how quickly they're able to get into the position they need to engage the enemy. And I'm not 100% on that, so if y'all know for sure, please post in the comment section. I just know that there's a different model used when it comes to combat. In fact, let's look at the flotillas really quick here. Yeah, and that's actually really helpful on positioning. The likelihood of this unit picking important targets during combat. Higher positioning increases the chance of targeting capital ships. So aircraft carriers are really good about going after battleships, for example. Battleships are about 50-50. Obviously, your destroyers are not good at that, but your destroyers are going to be great for meat shields, right? So just know there's two different speeds. You know, just because your ship is fast moving across the map does not mean it's going to be fast in combat. Doom stacks. Let me just talk to that really quick. Now, ideally, so what happens is when you have a fleet of a certain size, once it gets too large, you suffer a stacking penalty, like we were talking about in the air tutorial, where you suffer a stacking penalty. You also suffer a stacking penalty with your Navy. Just know that you're probably going to have to ignore it in most circumstances, which sucks. You know, I think it takes away a valuable part of the game, which is being strategic with how you structure your naval stacks. But the reason I say you may have to ignore it is that the AI, at least prior versions, I don't know if they finally figured this out, but would just do these doom stacks where it's like 40 ships in a stack, or 50 ships in a stack, way too big for a stack and for a commanding admiral. And so you'd have these massive stacking penalties, but if you went up against it with a normal size stack, you get slaughtered because the power differential was just so dramatic that even the stacking penalty didn't matter, right? Kind of think of like, you know, World War Z, where like the zombies just overwhelm you know, the people fighting it, even though they have the superior weapons and whatnot. I don't know if that's still the case. If it is, then you probably have to, you know, operate with doom stacks of your own. But just know that typically, like for example, in this case, we have 13 ships in this stack. This particular admiral can only command 12. And so we are suffering a position penalty of 112%. So now if we upgrade this guy to, I wonder if, so we're still getting a penalty, even though our admiral is a high enough rank to manage the number of these ships. Position penalty just means, again, going back to the illustration here, the chance that our ships are going to be effective in combat at targeting the things we want them to target. If you look at this other stack, the 241, right? 1500%. So obviously a doom stack that is too big won't work at all. But just know that the AI likes to pump out doom stacks of like 40 ships. And you may have to do something somewhat similar to compete against that. Now, what does positioning affect? We already talked about that a little bit. Just know that it affects how fast and how long that particular attacking ship can be in firing range and take part in combat. Okay? So in this case, our, Kaga is going to suffer a 7% penalty to its overall. Let's see here if I can click him. Positioning. I already went past him, huh? So he's a 0.91. He's going to suffer, I believe, probably a 7%. Yeah, he gets a 7% penalty to that in terms of his ability to quickly and longevity attack the ships that he wants to attack. So that's what this means. So it's very important. Keep an eye on it. But again, if the AI does doom stacks, you'll probably have to do something similar to counter that. Okay, so now getting away from just like main battle stuff, let's talk about convoy raiding and convoy protecting. What is that? So again, the overview video, we talked about supply lines. These are it. You can't see an enemy's supply lines, but you can predict where they are at based on where their extended territory is, right? So as the US, I know that Japan has a supply line somewhere in here because they own islands down here, right? And you have to supply those islands. I also know that they have supply lines going between mainland Japan and Manchuria because Japan owns territory in Manchuria. Same goes for Britain. You know they've got supply lines going to Gibraltar and perhaps through the Mediterranean down to Egypt. If not down to Egypt, almost certainly around Africa, down through South Africa and up, because they have territory in Egypt and they have territory in India and Singapore. What that means is that what you can do is you can take your submarines, for example, or cruisers or destroyers, whatever you want to use, but most of the time submarines, and put them on convoy raiding duty. Sorry. Let me take this guy out really quick. You can put them on convoy raiding. Let's say we think China. Let's pretend China owns Taiwan, since they think they do in real life anyways. What I'll do is he won't just convoy raid here, I believe. I think he'll kind of go around as well. And every once in a while, if China is sending supplies to Taiwan and you're at war with them, it'll give you a prompt letting you know that certain number of convoys were sunk. Now on your end, you have to worry about the same thing. Now you can build convoys and build escorts. I recommend really kind of probably throughout the game, if you have any sort of overseas presence at all, build these out because they can die off very quickly. Because as you can see, we've got a lot of stuff going on. And if someone's got a robust convoy raiding system going on against us, this number of convoys is going to go away really quickly. 78 is not very much, considering how long it takes to build a convoy. So it takes us 40 days. You know, in that 40 days, we could lose half, if not more, of those convoys. Okay. And you can't really turn off your supply network because you don't want to stop supplying your troops. So I recommend having this really high, you know, get as many convoys as you can. Now, what the escorts do is it decreases the chance that the submarines are going to be able to sink your ships. So if you have, for example, to Suwon, we say we want 5 convoys with this one transport, then it's going to take more submarines to sink that convoy, or the convoy or the submarines just going to be less successful in sinking convoys. So it might only hit once every 6 months, you know, instead of once every month. Or I need to put more subs there to do it. Now, you're not going to know. That's why your subs aren't sinking something. So, for example, if I have subs hanging out here by the channel of the Straits of Gibraltar, and I'm not sinking anything, I know there's a supply network going through here. And so it means that the UK has put a lot of convoy escorts with their convoys going through here. So that means I either need to go to a different area where I know he's got a supply line, or put more subs here to ensure that I hit. Okay. I believe that your subs are also going to be sinking escorts as well. Actually, I know that for a fact. So also know that you're going to want to keep your escort number pretty robust as well, because you're going to lose escorts as well in the process. As far as convoy rating, probably you want to use about 3-ish, 2 to 3 subs per stack for convoy rating, and then keep them moving, because as soon as you start sinking ships, your opponent, you know, AI or whoever, is going to know the region that those convoys were sunk, which means they know there's subs there, and they're going to send something to detect them. If you want to use subs to hunt fleets, people typically recommend between 12 and 18 submarines. So I've actually never used that strategy, but it's interesting to me. Maybe I will in the future. But if you have 12 to 18 subs in a fleet, you could probably go after somebody else's fleet. Just be aware that if there's even one ship that you're attacking that has a CAG, you're toast, because subs will not hold up at all against CAGs, and so they'll get toasted pretty quick. Okay. To that point, with regards to CAGs are phenomenal. Now, they take longer to build because people were basically spamming them. They were exploiting the system for which they were supposed to be used. And so now that they have a long build time, but they are fantastic. They do a ton of damage to sea fleets. So let me show you an example here. I think they're under carrier. Yeah. Sorry, I'm had a brain fart on where CAGs were, and they're not obviously here. Probably in a prototype. You know, I'll just show you. In fact, this will be easier. Okay, so CAGs do 62 damage to sea fleet. They can kind of hold their own against air also. So 25 against air. Chances are it's going to be against other CAGs, but you know, they can hold their own somewhat against other fighters. To put it in perspective, interceptors are 65, right? But if they went up against fighter bombers, you know, they're going to lose, but they'll at least be able to inflict some damage. But the big thing is sea attack is what you're using them for. You can kind of use them on land as well, but obviously you would ideally use your actual bombers for that. But notice your naval bomber is only going to do 5, or rather 35. So half the damage to the sea attack than your CAGs. So our naval bombers good? Yeah, they're good in certain circumstances. Particularly if you don't have a carrier fleet right? So if you're Germany, maybe you have naval bombers to use against the UK. But you really, if you want to use aircraft against sea, you want to go CAGs, right? Just hands down. And you know they'll toast subs, right? If you just have a sub fleet. So that's the big thing with CAGs. They specialize in sea attack. They can do some other things, you know, okay, but for the cost and for the length of time they take to build, you really should only be using them against sea fleets. Now, what do you do to kind of protect your supply lines and protect yourself from convoy raiding? A lot of people used to like to use frigates for patrol of subs and those ASW, which I was describing earlier. So if you go under cruisers, is not anti-air. Sorry, these guys, small warship ASWs, they're good, and using really frigates to detect and look for subs. So you're going to want to use your frigates. And they're also, what's really nice with frigates is they're fast enough to evade most fleets. And so you can use them to look for subs. And then if someone brings in a fleet to try and sweep up your frigates, they can get out of there pretty quick without being engaged. So I think a good example of that, which we don't have them, but you'd use light cruisers and or frigates for that purpose. We already talked about battle cruisers, using those independently. These guys, they're good for mopping up smaller fleets. Now, as far as build combinations are concerned, I talked about this at the beginning of the video, but I think it bears repeating. What you want to do for your build outs is couple your cruisers with your carriers and your battleship / heavy cruisers with destroyers. Okay, that's like your main composition for that particular type of fleet. And then round it out, you know, either with like a sub or a torpedo boat or, you know, something like that. But predominantly what you want is, if you have, say, 2 aircraft carriers, you've got a whole bunch of light cruisers protecting those 2 aircraft carriers. And then maybe you throw in a sub and, you know, or a seaplane or whatever for the detection and the early engage. But that predominantly is what that's going to look like. And then the same thing for your battleships with the destroyers, and then maybe a seaplane or a sub or 2 or whatever you want to do. But predominantly have it look like that. Okay. Also, the anti-air can be important. So just kind of assess the weakness of that particular fleet stack and then put something in it to make that weakness not so much a weakness. So if you have a weakness to air, put some anti-air ships in there. If you're susceptible to subs, you know, put the sub detection and so forth. Okay, so transitioning into the miscellaneous, just a couple quick things here and we'll conclude this video. Hopefully it was helpful for you guys. Again, the Navy stuff can be weird. I would just go into just really quick here. In terms of your movement orders, pretty self-explanatory. Sortie means exactly what it says here. Select a province and engage any enemy found there. If no hostile forces are found, you return to base. Okay. Intercept means you will intercept engage when they appear in a selected province and surrounded area. So if you have, for example, radar, or if you have subs in the area and you see somebody come through, the ships will leave port to go and engage it. Patrol is they just kind of go around all these different areas, just like your airplanes would, looking for ships to engage. Patrol can be really good to use if you're protecting your convoy supply line. And so maybe I would do patrol like right in here to protect my supply lines. That's how you use it. Transport is transporting your actual physical troops from one point to another. Invasion is going to be your amphibious assault. And then you can actually use your ships to escort your supply lines. Instead of those escort ships, you can actually use a fleet to do that. I don't do that very often because I tend to be pretty short on ships that I need available. Either I'm convoy raiding or convoy protecting through my patrol and whatnot. But just know if you want, you can actually have them go along an escort path. For example, you know, I could have them actually go along this path right here and protect that and then go back. And so they're kind of going back and forth, back and forth. So you can actually use them that way as well. Just know that aircraft carriers can sink battleships through airstrikes launched beyond the ability of the battleships to respond. So for example, battleships are here, aircraft carriers are up here. You can launch planes at them. And then also too, even if you're in the same region, those aircraft carriers are going to engage those battleships sooner than those battleships will be able to engage those aircraft carriers. And so chances are, if you have enough aircraft carriers and the weather's good, those aircraft carriers should probably sink those battleships before they even have a chance to engage. So just know that. However, and this is the point I want to make, this is where weather is important. See here, the storm right here? If we had aircraft carriers here, they had battleships, they might actually win that battle because they can engage, you know, say their ships are fast enough, they can get into position and engage me because I won't be able to launch my planes because the weather is crap. And so just know that weather can play a major factor, perhaps more so than other aspects of the game in combat, particularly if you're talking about aircraft carriers. So just be very aware of the weather. You probably want to have the weather tab on when you're microing or even macroing AI, you know, having the AI do it, aircraft carriers, because that is the one huge disadvantage that aircraft carriers have is the weather affects them more significantly than probably most any other unit in the game. And that can be exploited if someone's smart enough to see that the weather's a certain way and then engage you in that bad weather. Okay. Last thing I will focus on, and this kind of, I think is a nice transition at the very end of this video to pivot into what the next video will be, which will be kind of grand strategy and how this all fits together. But shore bombardment, using your ships in conjunction with an amphibious assault, decreases the defender's efficiency by 50%. Okay, so you want to try and use shore bombardment wherever possible during an amphibious attack, or even actually during an attack that wasn't amphibious. So take, for example, say we are Germany, Spain is on our side, and we're attacking Gibraltar by land. If you bring a naval fleet in to shore bombard, that'll decrease the defender's efficiency by 50%. So very powerful. Use shore bombardment wherever possible. And it'll make a big difference in terms of your amphibious landings and perhaps otherwise. So as always, if you found this video informative, please like it. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe. It helps other people find these tutorials. And if you are a veteran of the game, please comment below on tips and tricks that you have. And if you're new to the game and you have additional questions that I have not covered and you're confused about, please post in the comments section, and hopefully myself or somebody else who is knowledgeable in the game will comment and hopefully provide you the insights that you need. And with that, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you.